Jill here with Sirius Talisman. This is Soul Hour Mars night. Mars is 22 in Aquarius. Sun is 2 degrees Pisces, applying to slowly conjoin Rahu. Venus 13 degrees Pisces, ascendant 29 degrees Sagittarius, Moon in Aries. Jupiter in the 8th house, midheaven ruled by Venus. Well, I think this is one of the least tense elections to talk about this topic. All triggers apply for this. I'm going to talk about the concept of imprisonment, and I'm going to take a case for Mark Detroux, a study case. It is very likely that around less than age 9, there was attempt to kidnap me to something that would be an interface of something that is either related to something like Epstein or Detroux. It happened in Israel at a hospital where my grandmother was hospitalized. But before that, there were things happening through MK often type of operations that were exposing the infant me to things that infants should definitely not be exposed to. Children my age that would talk about these things usually would be taken to people that understand in these things, and then they will be taken to cults like Epstein, Detroux, what people later knew as satanic panic, until the Epstein list came out. I didn't speak. And yet I was targeted all my life. Now, as I was listening to the Detroux case, now the Detroux case, 1996, in my teenage years, and there is this news about this serial killer in Belgium that imprisoned girls and, kind of this psychopath. A year later, we will travel to Europe, and this notion that there are those psychopathic killers that kidnap girls and torture them. It was also the booming of the internet, so people were like, well, maybe in the dark web people order such things. At that time, my my family's half Dutch, half Israeli, and we would look for a place to live, whether to live here or to live there. I think we were in Nijmegen, and there was a Dutch realtor. I was probably 12, 13. My mother wanted to register me because I would be entitled to public housing, but I did not yet have my ID, and she was told to wait until I'm 16, but that anyway we would need to live in Netherlands. And we tried to look for apartment, and that realtor offers alcohol to then 12 or 13-year-old me, not even beer, like a whiskey or something. And me and my mom understand that he's waiting for her to trade me for housing. The years pass, and I think of nothing of the event, but I study English, I study French, I study German. Very difficult for me to study Dutch, even though I go and pay my own money for private school to study Dutch. And when they speak in Dutch, I understand. Then it was the subprime crisis. In the meantime, I would go through consecutive attempts to try to traffic me, to make me religious, to kidnap me. And I wouldn't even understand that that's the thing. But I found no job that is actually having a business model where a person goes to work, makes a contribution to society, goes back home, lives a good life. And no housing. Then I will try to study and run into what seems like a trafficking ring, kind of Epstein like, in academia, where whoever would speak up would be targeted, and whoever would have a research that basically it runs in interface to something that could be approved for MK Ultra and MK Ultra, how they work, the use of classified technologies, the very classification of technologies to keep something as pseudoscience that is completely accurate, definitive science. Somewhere I would begin to look at why can't I grow my business, and that would have to do with ritual abuse. Then I would tend to that topic, in the meantime tending to a political assassination prevention, inspired by an assassination of a journalist when I was in Netherlands. The assassination was before, but I ran into that when I was in the Netherlands. And then that case would come up again, linking to a pedo ring. And I understood that some of the people that tried to tend to their assassination would have been the extorted people. And I begin to delve into how that originates. Then I hear about brotherhoods, child marriages in brotherhoods between the 33-degree and boys. And I realized that Mark Detroux was one of those boys before he became one of these men, or was supposed to become one of these men. And then I think about the concept of imprisonment, because in 2024 there's a guy that was trying to interview Mark Detroux through his lawyers. Um, while I am healing myself from things unimaginable that are not even the tip of the iceberg of the tip of the things unimaginable. I realize that the people that do things, they do the things that were done to them. Which means that the people that heal from things heal from the very things that the people that did that to them need to heal, which is imprisonment and torture trauma. To create a person that traffics children to extortion cult, they needed to psychologically create a persona that has a thing about caging and torturing people. And then that guy eventually is exposed, goes to prison. None of the other folks goes to prison. He goes to prison and he spends his life there. And and usually these communities they use wombs of girls, and basically since he was two cells or a cell dividing, he was in trauma of torture and imprisonment in the womb. Parents, I said all triggers apply. Okay, it's kind of like, for new parents or for people trying to conceive, it's kind of like on the one hand you really need to know that. On the other hand, I don't want to trigger, so I just say all triggers apply. Because knowing that would be the point of interference, not to repeat that or not to enable that. Um, and yet addressing that is really triggering. So basically we have a situation that, since being a cell dividing, which is a product of the cloning agenda and the violence, if I think about the cloning agenda as the pebble, so the circles of violence, cloning agenda, and then with the common people would just be like domestic violence. And then with the wider circle, it would just be like, okay, child-free women and incels. Okay, but it affects all of those processes. So much so that it reaches the circle where there are two loving parents that choose to live in a place where the child can play outside, are told, I don't know, in Finland, people leave their parents outside and so on and so forth. Then there's a Detroux whose job as a child is to kidnap children. Now, the persona is prepared with being able to provide the love. Now, sometimes it's not the love that is missing, it's the easiest in that circle, but it can go all the way to try to target a family with campaigns to break down a family so that the child will have something missing. Now, the person that does that only receives the love that he needs through imprisonment trauma as a victim and perpetrator. For his victims to heal, his victims need to heal from torture and imprisonment trauma. For him to not be a perpetrator, he needs to heal from torture and imprisonment trauma. Now, of course, letting a guy loose like that is he would be harvested or predated upon by those who need people to run extortion codes for them because he knows the job. When torture and imprisonment trauma doesn't have, when the gates of the ghetto don't break. My grandfather went out of the ghetto when the gates of the ghetto broke, so he ran the fuck out. But when the gates of the ghetto don't break, and then suddenly a person is offered to be from the prisoner to the ward, and that's the only outlet. And that's how they create these people. Because a person cannot, he couldn't die, he couldn't contain that, and he had to somehow survivalistically be in control, present and not present. He had to both escape and be present because he couldn't die. And this is how a person becomes sadistic. Now, here's the funny thing, every single segment in this phase makes sense, okay? Guys born into these conditions, if he can't come out of the brotherhoods, if it's all a secret, if if that's his only place for where the most adaptable way for him to meet anything that's approximate to love is in those conditions, and and they're being proud of him when he does that. Now, basically, eventually he's disposed of, and then he goes from one trauma of prison cell experiment to another one. And of course, that phase also makes sense. I mean, we if we find out somebody is kidnapping and torturing and holding hostages people in his housing, of course he needs to be imprisoned. He can't just go to, you know, none of these phases is not sensible decision, but what we have is a situation where from being a dividing cell in the womb that was placed by torture and imprisonment, because it's like it's 9 months. And these were not the people that are, the parents that really want to bring children and so on and so forth, and they go through IVF and so on and so. Not the cases. The people kidnapped, raped, tortured to have a child for the network, and that baby is being tortured in the womb for however long it takes to have a baby. That usually does not end there, because when they are born, they're also tortured, sometimes even by their parents. At no juncture does a person get an exit point from the imprisonment that began when he was one cell dividing. And then his victims need to heal from just that. All the while, the cloning project still persists by public money, creating policies that are supposed to preserve birth by rape, or even birth by people who are not really ready to give birth. And then what happens during war? People have to what? Do crime to survive. And this is how the essence of the trauma, which is being helpless, confined, and tortured, only receiving love by being a torturer, is becoming like a dividing cell that grows and grows and grows into a world war. And the world war is actually the relief. Because of course the point was that he would have to be able to do successfully. And think about it, everything that a person is, and think about those are competitive vocations. They're competing over who will control the world. They extort people, they get politicians, they get people there. These politicians were manufactured so that they would be extortable. And then they have to compete at being the best extorter. So they have to become addicted to what they do. They have to believe that this is their nature and they are just living out their nature. Because they grew like an animal in a cage and they're only let out to be predators and create more animals in cages. Those animals are called human beings when it compounds to concentration camps, which is the timeline that the world is living out right now. Detention centers or whatever they call them. And this trauma is around housing, womb, fertility, birthing, and care. Now, naturally, that person reaches out to speak because he wants out of prison. But what prison? The prison that was a divine cell in the womb. While policies after policies and governments after government try to force birthing by rape and create millions of Detroux. Now, here is the thing, he was trained with mind control, he was trained with many things. To prevent such things, then people would need to address what creates them from the core. So any pressure on people to get pregnant, it doesn't have to be cloning farms and breeding. It can simply be the in-laws that are like, hey, when are you guys having a baby? Okay, if the Detroux state is the pebble, then the circles around that pebble. Now, the secret societies where they have boy marriages, they normally juxtapose that with oaths of silence that the person has to die by torture if they speak. So let's say somebody interviews Mark Dutroux. Can he say it? So to prevent that, we would need to abolish the cloning project, to somehow abolish these secret societies things. Where now here is the thing about the secret societies: none of them can speak, and they are, because they are surrounded with power, then they would use every trick in the book that we don't even know exists to blame shift, confuse identities. Even so much to the question, I'm saying, when Mark Dutroux was kidnapping those girls, who was kidnapping those girls? Was Mark Dutroux tortured and had something that was mind controlling him through his body to kidnap and torture? Was the alignment with that consciousness created by the oneness of the trauma? Because these people, they relate through torture. But then where there was no, they create as though there is a choice. When I was 5 years old, my mother had, some parents had, it can really terrify the children, but I'm not mad at parents. It's very difficult to raise children, definitely with Uranus in the 10th. And my mother was like, well, if you don't like it here, she opens the door and like, you can leave. And I'm like, I'm 5 years old. Where would I go? Okay, so that was the choice. Now, if I would go there, then probably I would be one of these girls that they would catch as the bones or something. Probably they wouldn't even identify that it was me. Now, she wasn't thinking about it. She was just mad. Like, try to grow a child as a single parent. It's very difficult. In a world that constantly expects a mother to traffic herself and her children. If not, the welfare can do that. They can help. If the child goes outside, it's like, okay, juxtapose that to a mark. If the child doesn't go outside, now they have this. Now they already have a trauma. They have some sort of a weird imprisonment trauma where they feel like they can't walk outside even though the door is open. Now, naturally, my mother did not intend to do that, but this is exactly the programming that is set to people in cults. Like, I don't mean to create parental shame, but we do need to take a look at these things. because this is exactly the idea that points to these children when they are tortured, and then they don't, as child, they don't really have a place to go. Their families torture us. In the cult, at least they get some love, and then they have to really, really show that they want it, so much so that their sense of self completely dissolves. So much so that it molds into a nature what they believe is their nature by a lot of torture. Now, for things to change, they need the world to change. And the world is run by those extortion cults and secret societies that have an oath of silence so that it won't change. And then civilization collapses, which is a point of relief to that world. Now, here is the thing. Let's do a thought experiment. Let's say Mark Dutroux recovered today. Would he be safe? Not because people would think he's a monster. Would he have housing? Would he have a job? Let's say he's completely safe around children, around adults. And not only that, let's say everybody's convinced and even his victims manage to heal because now we probably need to do a lot of inner child work. Is it safe for a child to go outside? If something happened to him, would anyone believe him? Would he have a way? Would he? Who could he turn to? The police is in those rituals. The social welfare in those rituals. The realtors in those rituals. Heck, the prison's wards might be in those rituals. Jurisdiction. Saint Michel Nihul. Watch Annika Lucas. She met that face. She was just the age that Mark Dutroux was supposed to kidnap when he was. Back then, he would have been 9 years old, but he met that pedo guy at 15. Now, what is met that pedo guy? In secret society language, he was wed as a boy to some pedo. It's either that or the 15 is a cover-up story and he was wed as a boy at like age 9 or 10 or something. Now, what do these secret societies do? Wealth consolidation on resources. This is why in the Rolodex there was a big issue between Babysyn and Deming, because one of them was with the separatist movement of Kurdistan from the Ottoman Empire or Turkey. Now you say, why does that make a difference in Netherlands? Well, it does, because they wanted to build a railway system from China to, to traffic more children, money launder that in oil and gas and rare earth minerals, so that they can power the Detroux states. Mark Detroux was an electrician. It had use in the cult. Now, how many families that have a house and are able to support their children do not have any investments related to the conglomerates that were gaining their wealth through extortion cults? The house that each and every one of us resides in, or the RV or whatnot, was manufactured by a company. Hmm. Venus, Venus. With Ascendant 26. It's Ascendant was just crossing Spica. If Mars wasn't 22 in this would be such a lovely Venus talisman right now. Uh, now here's another thing. Let's say somebody wanted to interview a guy like Mark Dutroux. On the way in and out, they would be subjected to a lot of attempts to put them in torture and mind control. And if they would have something to say, they would be probably targeted for saying it. I mean, they didn't, because that would be detouring the what Michel Nihul did. Okay, Mark Dutroux wanted to talk about everything and everyone that were coming to that house. I mean, he would have no interest to not do so. And he wasn't there alone. And I don't just mean the people he kidnapped. Now, there are many Dutroux estates. Let me tell you something. Just on the news, Rishon LeZion, there was a building. One of the building became a trafficking place, and then there were many, many men coming, and people have families trying to call the police, trying to this, trying to that. I'm like, why don't they fucking arrange as a community to try to think how many girls and boys are there, housing them as a community, besieging that place. I mean, it's Israel. Every man got a gun. So what's the problem? Because one neighbor was raping girls in Thailand, and one neighbor was, they just don't like it in their building. Now, how did Mark Dutroux have the confidence to kidnap and torture and cage so many girls? Nobody came to save him when it was happening to him. And then that was his ticket out of the prison. Why wouldn't he be confident? I mean, nobody came to save him. Why would he think that somebody would come to save those other ones? And where would they go to? The roundhouse with the welfare or emergency center? No, really, they would release the kids to where? The roundhouse? So why would he think that he would ever be exposed? If all of those that did that to him got away with that and to many other children, now anybody that would want to interview Mark Dutroux would be basically undoing Michel Nihul. Mark Dutroux is in prison, that's not a problem. But all the other ones aren't. Anybody wants to do the Rolodex list? There isn't anybody that didn't know anybody. What was the safest part in interviewing Mark Dutroux? Interviewing Mark Dutroux. All the rest of it was shit fuck scary. Wasn't that guy's? That guy's in jail. But the rest of them expected the interviewer to do a V shape, have a beer movie, and fly to some island. I already turned down such offers when I was in high school. I had to jab some I mean, it's not for the yellow pages. The point of such interviews is what I'm saying, is to change the reality. But everybody that controls the media, his clients, wants that to be different. People want to leave these things as the exotic psychopath that was exotically tortured and then exotically kidnapped girls, and then exotically one was a damsel in distress and they found out, and then exotically they brought Michelle Nihul to exotically keep all the Rolodex lists undercover, and then exotically expose the list, and then everybody flies to Thailand and rapes children. You could tell that I turned down some journalism offers in Of course, there would also be some exotically person assassinated in some exotic um, concentration camp zone, and people would all be fighting for the freedom of the press while they're pressing young children to be raped in concentration camps. What the fuck? What the fuck? Yeah, people don't need to lose weight; they need to gain muscle and abolish rape. That's the anomalies in cell growth, also fat cell growth, um, and absorption of minerals. They put toxins in the minerals. Now, they couldn't do that without visiting a Detroux estate. You see that without this Mars 22 is a Venus talisman there. Venus exalted in Pisces, Jupiter exalted in Cancer, Jupiter retrograde give us this Eureka. Moon in Aries is strong, but it's ruled by a 22 Mars. Tomorrow, Mars will be conjoining Deneb Algedy, and that is going to be one interesting date. I might do another Saturn Neptune. I did a Saturn Neptune oil. It's 5 milliliters and it's for May. Um, and I called it Sense of Self, Walls of the Ghetto Break. Now, This might get another consecutive consecration tomorrow, which is Saturn Day, um, when Mars gets out of the 22. Now, testimony for the troll-like people we have in Mark Alandra, episode 9 in Annika Lucas' podcast. That guy was supposed to be another Epstein. So there are many of them. Mars is sextile in Chiron in Aries, and Chiron is applying to trine the moon for Mark Detroux. It's 20. It's a Saturn return to the Rolodex, to the Detroux list. And all those missing children, they are missing to those places. Now, there's lineages and communities that sacrifice people. And it's not a modern invention. And those things are very important to basically change the reality of death and concentration camps in the world. Because those things are another phase of the event of a trauma of imprisonment. Now, I have tended, when I tend to political assassination prevention, and let me tell you that when I saw the way that there really is no solution for people that escape domestic violence, because they're offered the trauma of imprisonment when they come out of the trauma of imprisonment of domestic violence. And I was saying, okay, so who else deals with fear of assassination? And that would be, journalists and politicians. When I tended to that, actually, one of the cases that I encountered was a person who literally lives in imprisonment for like over 20 years. And That was 333. That was challenging because I was just trying to see, okay, what are solutions that can be that are not going to be like trauma. One of the assassinations that inspired me to end into political assassination prevention was where a person refused an ultimatum that was given to him to either be like literally kidnapped or basically be completely exposed. And of course, he chose not to be imprisoned, and it cleared the path like a red carpet for the assassin almost. Um, and then the guy that chose imprisonment had to live with suddenly him and his wife being kidnapped by whether it's police or intelligence and being told that it's for their own good, where they could as easily be assassinated in that way, and knowing that those who commit assassinations. um, Now, of course, without extortion codes, they cannot be political assassinations. Um, anyway, so I just think about it and I realized that even these, big shots out there, they are essentially dealing with the same situation of a woman escaping domestic violence and have no solutions. And to tend to that, one would have to tend to the things that they can't say. When I looked at Dutroux's chart, immediately what popped to me was this fourth house Aquarius thing with um, Lilith. I think I had a good chart for Mark Dutroux. And this is what 6 November 1956. Another one with the sixes. Um, yeah. So this is an AA chart, means we have the ascendant in midheaven, 11-degree ascendant, Mars in Pisces, Lilith, Chiron. Pluto will be going over his Lilith Chiron. This Lilith Chiron in the fourth, and immediately it popped for me because I was like, hey, that guy was going through that at home, and housing was associated with that. The Saturn in the second house, later it became his skill, okay, unfortunately to do what was done to him. And Jupiter 24, Jupiter is conjoining Jupiter and the lot of fortune, they're almost besieging Al Qaid, which is besiegement of cities, causing ailment, which cause, by the way, when a person is ill, they go to hospital. If they are targeted, then they're kidnapped at a hospital. Um, 29, Rahu, Rahu Ketu.